Governor Schwarzenegger is no longer asking lawmakers to remove a high-speed rail bond from the November ballot, but he does want legislation that would tie spending the money to guarantees of support from the federal government and private sector. What does this do to the project?
Patty, I don't know what guarantee means, but we won't be able to do that until we have contracts. We can't have contracts until after the bonds in California are approved in November of 2008. But we can certainly have strong indications of federal support. For example, a bill will be pending, authored by Chairman Oberstar of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, that will create tax credit bonds for high-speed rail, which would fund one-third of our project at least. And we're getting an indication of strong interest from private investors in the High-Speed Rail Authority project.
Welcome to KCBS In-Depth, a news interview program with a discussion of one of the topics making news this week. This is KCBS In-Depth.
Our guest on KCBS In-Depth is Rod Diridon, Chair Emeritus and member of the California High-Speed Rail Authority. Diridon is also Chair-elect of the National High-Speed and Intercity Rail Committee of the American Public Transportation Association. He also heads the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. Along with Ed Cavaniero, I'm Patty Rising. Let's talk about this governor's latest move. Some would say he's trying to doom the project.
He was sage enough. He's a very smart guy, as we all know about our governor. And he appointed his own financial advisor to the High-Speed Rail Authority board, David Crane, who lives here in San Francisco. He's a venture capitalist. And David is there to make sure that we do have guarantee, strong indication of federal funding and private funding, so that once we approve the bonds for California, the general obligation, no tax increase bonds on the November election in California, we won't have to go back to the voters in California for more money. That's a reasonable concern on the part of the governor. And I think we can show the governor, through David Crane, that we won't have to go back for more California money, that indeed the federal and private funding will cover the requirements for the starter element, which is about $30 billion for the line between San Francisco through San Jose, through L.A. and to Anaheim. And it's our responsibility to prove that to him.
So what exactly does the bond measure on the November ballot do?
The bond measure on the November ballot is $9.95 billion. Again, a general obligation bond, so there's no tax increase. It's paid for out of the debt service portion of our general fund. And it would provide $9 billion for the High-Speed Rail Authority project, which is about one-third of the project cost. And it would also provide an additional $950 million, which when matched would be almost $2 billion, to support and upgrade the feeder and distribution systems for the high-speed rail program. BART, Caltrain, Capital Trains, the Altamont Express, and other kinds of trains like that are the feeder trains that will make the high-speed rail program work. In San Francisco, Muni Metro and the cable cars would receive a significant amount of money from that bond measure.
So that bond measure is just one part of this whole project. Why is it so? It's a huge amount of money. Why is this needed?
Ed, first of all, it's a huge amount of money, but in terms of building a brand new transportation system that's going to serve the state of California for 100 years, it's really not that much money. It's money we should have been spending a long time ago. 13 countries in the world have high-speed rail now. Only America doesn't. The second thing, why is it so important? Because until the people in the state of California go on record as being willing to fund this project, we're not going to get federal support, and we're not going to get private support. We're certainly not going to get private investors coming in and putting their money into the project until the government will put money in the project. And having the people of California pay one-third of the price of this project and then never again having to put money into a program that will expand and expand and expand is an awfully good deal for California.
The way I understand this, the latest wrinkle from the governor, they're going to have to put this language of the guarantee of the federal and the private sector funding into the ballot measure proposal for November. So that language they haven't even come up with the language yet.
Pardon me. I really don't believe they're going to be able to come up with the language and get it passed through the legislature in time to have any effect. And but even if they don't, the fact that the governor wants this is as significant as though there was a ballot language. Because if the governor supports this bill, this bond measure, it'll pass. He is a very popular governor. We know that. The measure is very popular. We're getting good polling numbers on it. Only if the governor opposes it would we expect to have trouble with this bond measure. So the governor's support is as important as legislation.
Also on November, there could be some other really big ticket items, including healthcare reform, bond money for schools and university buildings, water projects, courthouse construction. States also facing this $14 billion deficit. You got a lot of competition coming against a lot of things.
Patty, there really isn't a relationship between the current year deficit and this bond measure. This bond measure would be paid off over the next 30 years. And wouldn't even be paid off in this year's budget. Wouldn't be paid off for the next several years' budget. It wouldn't even start being paid. It wouldn't be paid off until we start selling the bonds. We wouldn't be selling the bonds until we need the money, which is into the early part of the next decade. So it isn't going to affect the current budget crisis of the state of California. It is, though, something, and those other measures too, are things that we should have been doing for all of these years. And in California, because we're so averse to talking about spending money, we have been deferring expenditures on capital improvements for decades. The last time we put any money into the state of California was under Pat Brown. That's when we built our highways. That's when we built our waterways. That's when we built the major investments in our colleges. And it's time now. We can't skate anymore.
Why has the governor been lukewarm about this project? Is it because of all the things that voters are being asked to approve?
Yet I think that the governor really hasn't been lukewarm. He's really been enthused about high-speed rail. His concern has been about the timing. And his primary concern is competition with the other bond measures, which he considers to be very important. He is also concerned that we don't get on the hook for this project and then have to put more government money into it. If we can show him, and I'm sure we can because it's been done this way all over the world, that a small investment from California will trigger investments from the federal government and from the private sector, then I think he's going to be very enthusiastically supportive of the program.
It sounds like you were saying earlier that high-speed rail could be dead if voters don't approve this in November. Do you think that's true?
Oh, I think it is true, Ed. If for some reason, if either the project is delayed again, this would be the third time, or the voters turn this down, then nobody's going to work on high-speed rail for California for a long time. We've been breaking our tush on it. We've spent $31 million on the required federal studies. We've gotten all of those things done. We have enthusiasm from all over the world for the project now. People from Japan and France and Spain and Italy and other countries that have built their systems are coming to California to advise on our system. The big investors throughout the world, big engineering firms, are talking to us about how they can become involved. They're not going to have that confidence if the measure is either delayed or fails in November.
So it's do or die time. You are a huge supporter. You've been involved in this issue, since the 80s?
I was very pleased to be on the first TGV, French high-speed train, when it went into inaugural operation in 1982, and have worked on this project off and on ever since. Not unlike Quentin Kopp and Senator Costa, or now Congressmember Costa, and many others. But we've really invested part of our lives in this because we know it's the right thing. You can't tell us that 13 of the leading industrialized countries in the world are all wrong, and only the United States is right by not having high-speed trains.
So how come the U.S. has been, and California in particular, so slow to get aboard?
Well, I think the first thing is that it's a big price tag, especially the first item is a big price tag. Secondly, there is ingrained opposition to it. The oil companies are not real excited about high-speed trains because a high-speed train uses 1/6 the energy of a car. Some of the short-hop airlines aren't real excited about it either, although the short-hop airlines could very well run this system. We're going to bid out the operation of the system, and we would be very happy to have a Southwest or Alaska or Virgin Air or one of the other very experienced airlines running the system like they would a very good airline. So we hope that that opposition will fail to have any impact and will pull back. And I think they certainly will if we have the governor's support.
Our guest on KCBS In Depth is Rod Diridon, Chair Emeritus and member of the California High-Speed Rail Authority. I'm Patty Rising with Ed Cavagnaro.
Okay, so if I live in the Bay Area or Los Angeles, Southern California, or maybe Sacramento, I could see the benefit to me. How do you convince a voter in Eureka or Chico that they should vote for this?
Well, Eureka is going to be a way in the future, except that they are concerned about the overall economic vitality of the state of California, and they are concerned about pollution that could cause more global warming and maybe cause Eureka to be underwater. So Eureka does have a stake. Chico has even a greater stake in that sometime in the future it's highly probable that we would be extending a high-speed rail line from Sacramento up through Chico to Redding. That's a very easy route to do because it's all flat and there's a lot of people moving into that area. So even those more remote areas ought to be supportive, and yet those are a very small population compared to the urban population which is served. Sacramento, the Central Valley, the Bay Area, Los Angeles, the Inland Empire and the Riverside area and on down to San Diego, that's 85% of the state's population, and they will be served.
Best case scenario, how soon would they all be served?
If the bonds pass, linchpin, if the bonds pass in November, then we would expect to proceed with engineering and maybe into contracts by 210, 212, into construction at about that time. Then it depends on how quickly the tunneling goes. We have a lot of tunneling, but there's every possibility that we would have the system in operation from Anaheim through L.A., San Jose, and to San Francisco, the starter line, by 2018 to 2020.
How many people need to use this thing in order for it to be economically viable?
Well, I don't know how to answer that question, but I do know the people that are projected to use it. We've had two very strong conservative economics firms, financial analysts, the Cambridge Systematics and Charles River Associates, and the indication is that about 117 to 120 million riders per year will use this system. And at that level of ridership, we would gross about $4 billion and net about $1.2 to $1.3 billion. So that's pretty attractive, and these are conservative estimates.
When you talk about competing with those short hoppers, I mean, you can get some great deals on flights. Mm-hmm. Can you compete with that particular segment? Because that is your main competition, right? Well, that and automobiles. People driving up and down the state in automobiles, which would be the primary changeover. The primary rider for the Caltrain system, for the high-speed rail system, would be an auto driver. The short hop airlines typically are around $100 a direction from SFO or the Bay Area to LA and the Anaheim area. Unless there's a price war or something like that, and they can't sustain the price wars for a period of time because they can't make any money when there's a price war. We calculated our ridership projections and income and net projections based on $50 a ride. And instead of in the valley, where if you take a valley trip, say Fresno or Bakersfield to the Bay Area, you have to pay as much as a transcontinental air flight. That isn't the way it is for the high-speed rail. We have an incrementally less, so it's about $18 from Fresno to the Bay Area. So you pay incrementally less than the $50 if you're a shorter run. And even on that basis, we're showing a huge ridership and we're showing a good net. So you're talking $50 each way from San Francisco to Los Angeles.
That's right.
Are the European high-speed lines, are they subsidized or do they cover their costs?
Oh, they make money. High-speed rail systems all over the world have a net positive cash flow from operations after the starter line is built by government. And the systems in Europe and the systems in Japan, which are the principal systems, kind of the poster child systems, are making enough now to extend their systems. They don't have to go to private investors, anybody else, to build their extensions because they're making enough net on their operations of the current lines to extend it.
And you know there will be people who will say that'll never happen here. I mean, look what happened to the Golden Gate Bridge. They said once it's paid off, that's it. And now we're paying, what, $5?
Well, the Golden Gate Bridge does need repairs. I don't know much about it, so I'm not going to get involved.
You're not a bridge guy.
Well, you're covering a whole lot of other expenses from those bridge tolls that relate to mass transportation, including Muni Metro. So it's a good thing. And the bridge tolls in New York are much higher than the bridge tolls in this area, so we ought to count our lucky stars that they're only where they are. But the potential of us making enough money on the high-speed train system to expand the system is real. It's been confirmed by two independent, very high-quality, conservative financial analysts, and I think it's true.
So none of the systems overseas are government subsidized? Am I understanding you correctly?
They were government subsidized when they got started. Typically government paid for the starter line, just as we're asking some government investment in our starter line. But after the starter lines have been developed, they became privatized, were put under private contractors, and the private contractors then pay all of their cost and pay the government for the right to operate the system.
We talked in the opening of our conversation about the governor wanting some federal commitments and some private sector commitments. What have our discussions been with the federal government in terms of what kind of money we can expect from them?
We're in close contact, both directly with Chairman Oberstar of the House Transportation and Infrastructure, where the bill has to come, also with Senator Boxer, who chairs the Senate side committee. And, of course, Senator Boxer is very enthused about our program, as well as working through the American Public Transit Association High-Speed and Intercity Rail Committee, which I am going to be chairing next year and vice chair now. All of those organizations, which are the principal functionaries to make this happen at the national level, are supportive and enthused. And as long as they can get their friends back there to help, I think we're going to be just fine.
Well, you said it's been seriously delayed twice before. What was behind all of the delays? Because those were very costly.
Ed, let me first answer the costly side. When you're talking about a $30 billion project and you have a 5% per year construction inflation, and it's usually higher than 5%, every time you lose a year, you lose $1.5 billion in buying power. So every time we lose a year on this, and we've lost several because of those delays, then we lose buying power that makes the project more expensive in order to buy the same project. And we can't afford delays. The second point was what caused those delays. And on each occasion, the governor felt that there were priority for other bond measures, that the bond measures had to go ahead. In one case, it was the bailout bonds for the terrible deficit we had at the end of the Davis period and at the beginning of the Schwarzenegger period. And, it's hard to argue with them. In fact, we agreed that those measures were terribly important. We had to have them for the state to survive. This time, though, it's the high-speed rail program's time.
There was also a very long debate about which route to take between Southern California and Northern, and that was just decided. Tell us about why the Pacheco route through San Jose was decided to go.
The two final routes that were under consideration were the Pacheco and the Altamont route, and I believe that the cost of the two routes was similar. The ridership on the two routes and therefore the revenue on the two routes were similar. The real issue was the environmental. And with the Altamont route, you had to come down through the Altamont Pass, which is similar to going through the Mount Hamilton Range, so they're comparable there. But the real issue was getting across the bay. You had to cross right over the top of the Don Edwards Wildlife Refuge. And putting a new bridge across that wildlife refuge into the salt marshes would have been horrendous. All of the Congress members on the West Bay, Speaker Pelosi didn't take a stand, but all of the rest, all the way down to Monterey, signed a letter saying that they would not support a route through the Don Edwards Wildlife Refuge. On the other hand, we were able to come through the water area, the riparian area of southern near Merced, on an adjacent road. It was right adjacent to the Henry Miller Road, which is a big, wide road with wide shoulders, and we didn't have to dig up riparian habitat, undisturbed land for most of that route. So I think that was the difference.
The Pacheco Pass route has been endorsed. Is there anything that could change that? I mean, that's pretty much part of the proposal.
Not realistically now. The proposal was made by the engineering firms. It was made by the staff. It was not disagreed with by the board, and that's all the law requires. It's now back with the Federal Railroad Administration for the development of a record of decision. Once they're done circulating it through the federal agencies, that'll come back to us then for final approval as a record of decision, which is a legal term, and be recorded into the congressional record. And I don't think anything can change it now.
How do you think that selected route will affect the bond measure's popularity in November, if at all?
I think it's going to help it, because it certainly will bring in all of the very large population in the Monterey-Santa Cruz Bay. It's also going to inure the large population on the West Bay Peninsula cities and the Santa Clara, San Benito County area, all of which will be served by the Pacheco route. And I think there's a huge amount of voter support and population in those areas. And in the process, we're going to have to, and have committed ourselves to, seriously upgrading the Altamont Express and other transportation systems in the Altamont corridor, but building a train that will stop. in all of the little cities. So little cities, they're not little anymore, but Tracy, Livermore, Pleasanton, Hacienda, and right on down through, they need rail service. They wouldn't get it with a high-speed train because it would never stop. But if we upgrade the Altamont Express to a 80-mile-an-hour modern commuter rail system, then it could stop in all of those cities and provide very quick and effective service both to Redwood City and as well as into Silicon Valley, where a lot of jobs are located.
Our guest on KCBS In Depth is Rod Diridon, Chair Emeritus and member of the California High-Speed Rail Authority. I'm Patty Rising with Ed Cavaniero.
Weren't there some environmental concerns, or aren't there, about the Pacheco Pass route, something about wetlands near Los Banos, Pacheco Pass area?
Ed, you're right, and that's what I was trying to refer to when I mentioned Henry Miller Road. Henry Miller Road goes through those wetlands there. Now, by the way, they're not very large compared to the bay, but there are some wetlands there. But Henry Miller Road goes right through them now. It's a road built with big, wide shoulders. In some places there are farmhouses, some places irrigation and drainage ditches and so on that are already built adjacent to that road. So there's plenty of room for the high-speed rail system with very little additional construction in what we would call riparian habitat or those wetlands.
What is your estimate of how this will affect carbon emissions? Do you have any estimates of how many cars would be taken off the road if this is built?
Ed, I'm glad you asked that question. We have estimates that are prepared by the engineers, and they're pretty exact. For example, the high-speed train system, as we envision it, would use 1/6 the energy of automobiles for each person riding. It would eliminate 12.4 billion pounds per year of CO2 emissions that cause global warming. That's 12.4 billion pounds that would be eliminated from the air by using this system instead of the alternate systems. And in addition to that, it would eliminate the requirement for about 5 million barrels of foreign oil that we use to operate our systems in California. Instead of having to import that foreign oil, we would be able to use the train and avoid the use of petroleum. So it's good. It's the environmentally most attractive thing you can imagine.
Given those figures, have you got some environmental groups lined up behind you that are going to help you with the November bond measure?
Yes, it's very interesting to note that although several of the environmental organizations supported the Altamont and were not very happy about our decision in regard to the Pacheco, that they all have supported high-speed rail. The Sierra Club several years ago identified high-speed rail as their number 3 project in the nation in terms of positive environmental impact, number 3 construction project in the nation in terms of positive environmental impact. So I think that once we sort through this process, work out the compromises that are necessary, especially in terms of new service and better service for commuter rail in the Altamont Express and Altamont Pass area, I think we're going to find universal support from the communities that are of interest in this, business, environmental, labor, and so on and so on.
You mentioned earlier this is a do-or-die time, that the ballot measure is. What kind of things do you have planned in order to let the public know about this? I mean, do you have a campaign formulating right now? You're getting ready to go?
Well, we're doing that in 2 ways, Patty. The High-Speed Rail Authority Board is reaching out and conducting public hearings all over the state and has for the last 10 years. Just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of public hearings up and down the state at various times when decisions had to be made, and gradually the public's beginning to be aware of the issue. Secondly, a separate organization called the High-Speed Rail Coalition, California High-Speed Rail Coalition, made up of citizen groups, everything from the manufacturing organizations up and down the state to labor to engineering and construction. And they've come together and created a coalition which is ready to promote the bond measure. And we wish them well. We're not going to be directly involved, but we wish them well in that regard, and I think they're going to be successful.
Have you seen any internal polling that would indicate how the public thus far is kind of divided on this thing?
The last polls I saw were over a year old now, but at that time it showed that the high-speed rail was favored by 82% of the people in the state. We can't get 82% of the people to agree on motherhood. And in addition to that, the bonds, if they were voted on at the time of the poll, would be supported by between 57 and 70% of the people. Now, we don't know how that stands now. We'll have to go back and look at it. But remember, these are no tax increase bonds. These are bonds paid for out of the capital improvement portion of the general budget of the state of California. So the public will recognize that by voting for this, they're not increasing their taxes, but they are going to create a high-speed rail system for the state.
And you're going to need 2/3 majority on that?
No, this
No,
is a majority
just,
vote.
okay.
Only a majority vote because it's a constitutional action.
Hey, let's imagine the future, and you're going from your home area of San Jose to L.A. Take us on a trip. How will that work?
Well, you're going to hop on the Muni Metro system at Suburb in San Francisco. Let's do it even in better.
Well, I said San Jose, but go ahead.
Let's talk Bay Area wide. Let's say you live in the Oakland Hills. You're going to walk down to your local BART station, hop on BART, and it's going to take you to the Transbay Terminal. You're going to pull in on the BART train and walk across the platform, and under the Transbay Terminal are the brand new shiny high-speed rail trains, because we're gonna extend them right under the Transbay Terminal. You hop on that train, and if you want to go to L.A., you get the express train. The express train will zoom on down, stop in San Jose, and go like a scared cat, 220 miles an hour, through all the little small towns, not stopping, and then they stop next in Union Station in downtown L.A. But you weren't really going to L.A. You were taking the kids to Disneyland. So you stop in L.A. and you go on down to Anaheim. You make that trip from San Francisco downtown to downtown L.A. in 2 hours and 30 minutes. 2 hours and 30 minutes downtown to downtown. I make that trip now frequently by air. I get to the airport. I have to sit around and go through the security process and sit around, wait for the plane. Sometimes the plane takes off on time, sometimes not. That pre-time is at least an hour. You then take off, and you're burning all that petroleum as you take off up into the air. You're only at optimum flying altitude for a few minutes, and then you come down, and you're having to moderate your flight with those petroleum-burning engines again. You then come in. If you make your landing slot, you come right into LAX. If not, you circle. You get into LAX. You walk over. You then get a cab where you pay another $65 to get to downtown LA, and that takes you 4 hours to 4.5 hours. If you did it on the high-speed train, it cost you $50 for the whole trip, downtown to downtown, and you did it in 2 hours and 30 minutes.
How many trains like that would there be a day?
Well, the idea is to have them running about 10 minutes apart. And not every train would be the express train. I don't know what the mix would be. We'd have to figure that out from demand. But every other train or every third train would be express. The interim trains would be local, and they'd be every 10 minutes.
Thank you very much for joining us. Our guest on KCBS In Depth has been Rod Diridon, a member of California's High-Speed Rail Authority. Along with Ed Cavagnaro, I'm Patty Rising.
KCBS In Depth, a news interview program. Heard Sundays at 8:30 a.m. and 8:30 p.m. KCBS In Depth is produced by Cheryl Raines on All News 740 KCBS.